Yes, Kiran will live.
Good evening to you all. I am Kiran Keshavamurthy, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Ranjita Biswas. She's a psychiatrist by professional training. Her areas of interest are mental health, gender, and sexuality. She has done her MPhil and PhD in Women's Studies from Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and her doctoral studies explored how medico-legal knowledge of sexual violence is produced in India and its implications for legal justice. Um, so just a second. Um, Her doctoral thesis explored how medico-legal knowledge of sexual violence is produced in India and its implications for legal justice. She has co-edited a book, Intimate Others, Marriage and Sexualities in India, and written articles in English and Bangla on issues of sexual violence, gender, sexuality, and mental health. She identifies as a queer feminist activist researcher. She's a member of Sappho for Equality, an activist forum working for the rights and social justice of persons with non-normative gender, sexual identities or expressions, especially focusing on the rights of lesbian, bisexual, queer women, and trans or trans-masculine F2M persons. Her talk is titled Looking Back, Looking Forward, Violence, Precarity, and Queer Lives. On behalf of Team Manajuri, I welcome you to today's session. Over to you.
Thank you, Kiran. I'd also like to thank Team Manajuri for providing this platform for such a discussion on gender sexuality. And I also want to extend my thanks to Kiran as well for thinking of me, about me as one of the speakers. As you've all heard, the title of the talk is Looking Back, Looking Forward, Violence, Precarity, and Queer Life. So what I'll be doing here is I'll be looking a little, revisiting the laws, the recent changes in the laws that have come up, and that impact queer lives, and also the present pandemic situation, and contextualize this in the lives within the lives of queer identified people, and how that kind of brings brings up certain concerns about precarity and violence and how they impact these lives. Um, Past few years in particular has seen a lot of debate and discussion being generated around these two laws that have the potential to impact trans, star, and queer people's lives in major ways. One, I'm talking about the partial reading down of Section 377 in 2018, and also the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. So these will be the two laws that I'll be talking about briefly. Both these legal happenings, so to speak, have been the result of years of political struggle and legal campaigns by the queer community and its allies. However, these two reforms did not have or do not have an equally favorable impact on queer lives. On the one hand, the partial reading down of Section 377 has been welcomed with much joy, relief, and enthusiasm, because it has finally recognized the right of mutually consenting adults to engage sexually and intimately, irrespective of their gender or sex. And in effect, it has decriminalized homosexuality and acknowledged that discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is a violation of freedom of speech and expression. Now, we know that legal reforms are supposed to usher in social change. And it has been almost 2 years since September 2018. And I'll be talking a little about the partial striking down of the Section 377. And it's been 2 years since September 2018. And we see, apart from a few pockets of acceptance, there has not been any sustainable change in the state or societal attitude towards non-heteronormative people. People have perhaps started to live the personal private lives with much confidence with their partners of choice, and have also come out in social media circles with pride, or even participated in the pride marches in full public view, perhaps. And one other major positive change that has occurred post the reading down of 377 has been the where the market and the corporate world have been very welcoming and apparently inclusive. And I put this apparently. I want to emphasize this because when the terms of inclusion have been mostly targeting the queer community as valid consumers rather than working partners. So this has been some of these changes that seem to be positive. But when we look at the more formal public sphere or even the personal familial spaces, not much change is evident in terms of ensuring rights of LGBTQ people, in terms of living with dignity and without pretense. So what has been the larger scenario in terms of socioeconomic and civil political rights post the reading down of Section 377? We see that following the reading down, no affirmative policies or laws have been implemented by the state. Though the verdict on 377 by the Supreme Court promised much, no affirmative steps have been taken in the realm of education, health, and employment, which would have a positive impact on queer lives. Now, coming to the other law, that is the Transgender People's Protection of Rights Act, which was passed in 2019. This act received a lot of criticism from many sections in the transgender communities, the criticism was mostly on how discriminatory this present act is and how it works absolutely opposite to the spirit of self-determination of gender that was proposed in the NALSA verdict of 2014. So what we see in this act is, instead of protecting the rights of the trans star community, it takes away the existing rights that were possible due to the NALSA verdict, and it makes surgical transition the crux of gender determination, and brings down gender to the two binaries of male-female post-surgery, and it does not include the non-binary individuals of the whole range of trans star persons who would want to also who have been included in the NALSA verdict of 2014. So what we see in the past 2 years, the decriminalization of homosexuality has been a very important milestone, something to build upon. But the self-determination of gender is a milestone that still needs to be built, needs to be worked on. And in this regard, there are many more journeys that we need to undertake. Now, the question is, how do we chart these journeys? Does legal reform necessarily ensure social transformation? Does it ensure a life of dignity and respect? Does it ensure the actualization of rights? I'll now come to 2020. 2020 has been a very difficult time for all in many respects. This whole year we have spent in first dreading and then battling and then learning to live and die with the virus. And during this time, we have also seen a shift in the meanings of what we understood previously as love, life, and livelihood. And here I'll talk a little about what the COVID-19 situation has meant for queer lives. We know the queer community is already perched very precariously on the edge of livability. But the COVID-19 situation has actually thrown up new challenges that have rendered queer lives ever more precarious. Um, what love entailed in during this time was being stuck in another city alone and away from loved ones, having to cope with that. Uh, what love also entailed was having to cope with living separated from loved ones because you love them and because you want them to be safe and healthy. It has also entailed losing loved ones to the disease and not being able to even give a meaningful farewell to the person who's left you. Love has also the shifting of meanings in love have also entailed have been in situations where staying together in couplehood and partnership, or even away from each other during the lockdown, during the pandemic, has perhaps strengthened some bonds and also broken others. Now, coming to the shifted meaning about life. Life itself, I think, took on a completely different significance when we saw some lives being rendered insignificant, abject, through negligence, through deprivation, through acts of repression and incarceration. So we saw the state imprisoning people randomly and vindictively without any regard for any due process, just for voicing dissent. We saw lives being lost due to sheer apathy of the administration that led to deprivation and denial of rights. We saw lives being lost due to purposefully planned and executed hatred by certain sections of the society and certain political forces. Now, all these take up another meaning when it comes to gender sexual non-conforming people, because in all these situations, their different gender sexual identity or expression becomes an additional marker to peg the vicious attacks that happen physically or even when they are engaged in social media lynching. So when a person is being singled out by the police for um, breaking the norms of lockdown, the person's gender or sexual expression becomes a reason for harassing and beating up, repressing furthermore. Or even when a person is expressing their political views on the social media, the rampant social media lynching that takes place also pegs its attack on the fact that this person is gender non-conforming. So this completely takes a new dimension when the person's gender sexual difference is at the forefront, or rather it's brought to the forefront. Also coming to the recent citizenship concerns with the proposed CAA, NRC and NPR, which brought queer lives to further crisis. Those of us who were forced to leave home, who have been staying elsewhere, those who do not have relevant papers of identification, those who have transitioned into a new identity and a new life, what does CAA or the NRC or NPR mean to them? What kind of challenges can they face if these come into force? And what would be their lives, or what would be the incarceration like? Coming to livelihoods, I think this time during the pandemic, um, it's just a random thought. I don't have anything to substantiate it, but I feel the economic losses suffered by people far surpasses even the times of demonetization. There seems to be an abrupt and extensive erasure of livelihoods. For queer people with incomplete education, with having to leave home early, with desert, being deserted by families, these are the situations in which they find themselves mostly self-employed in jobs like sex work, beauticians, beauty industry, physiotherapy, or even being engaged in semi-skilled jobs like call centers, eateries, courier services, etc. All these have completely disappeared with the pandemic, in situations of pandemic, such that lives have come to a standstill. There is absolutely no resources for living their daily lives. Now, generally, how do queer lives negotiate precarity and violence? Um, and I'm now coming to the situation that the pandemic has thrown us into, where it meant staying home. Staying safe was equated to staying home. Now, what did going out mean for the queer community? Going out, not having to spend time at home, meant lesser time with disapproving family members. So going out and spending lesser time at home was an important way to stall violence. Going out also meant accessing support networks of friends, of organizations, support groups, of cultural spaces. Going out meant economic sustenance. And economic sustenance was important or is important, not just to be able to uh, fulfill your basic needs, but also to be able to sometimes help out in the family, and also to uh, perhaps buy a modicum of respect within your family. But most importantly, definitely to be self-sustaining. But then that would be possible if you're going out. Going out would also be expressing gender sexual preferences easily and freely. So, inhabiting the public spaces, inhabiting your own preferred spaces of friends, cultural activities meant that you could dress up, you could be yourself, you could act yourself, which was perhaps not possible at home because of privacy issues, because of disapproval from the family. So this this was such an affirmative way to be when you're going out. And of course, accessing social gatherings and political movements, being part of these movements, being part of these gatherings, were also, in a way, um, meant, in a way, um, affirming, self-affirming, and to also engage in meaningful activities. Now, coming to the pandemic, what does staying at home mean now? So, staying at home means physical, sexual, emotional violence. The everydayness of violence being increased many times. Staying at home meant either being outed forcefully or wanting to come out willingly to your parents, to your family members, perhaps utilizing this moment of togetherness at home and trying to talk about your own gender sexuality. And that it could also be being, you do not want to come out, but you're being outed forcefully because your parents are constantly, or your family members are constantly monitoring your movements and your expressions. Now that then resulted in many families forcefully marrying off their daughters, um, or the gender non-conforming their children, sending off sending them off to families, relatives elsewhere, far away, or taking them to doctors, treating them forcibly. Staying at home also meant denial and curbing of identity expression. So you do not have the freedom to dress up, to dress in your preferred gender expression. Your family members are constantly misgendering you, and deliberately so, because they feel that this is the time to come to bring you back to your senses, to bring you back to the mainstream. So constantly misgendering, um, a lot of emotional blackmail, because this is the right time when people are all together at home and you get the chance to, you think that you're able to hammer some sense into your child over phone call, whom you're talking to, and who are these support networks, who are these friends, are you talking to your loved ones, your partners? And all this then also meant being driven out of home, being thrown out of home. or being driven out of rented accommodation because you're not being able to conform to the norm, you're not being able to pay the rent, you're forced to leave home because you want to escape that forced marriage, which your family members are forcing you into, and thereby you are now vulnerable in a vulnerable situation because then you run the risk to life and health. Staying at home also means incarceration, loneliness, helplessness, and hopelessness about your future. Staying at home also entails a lot of doubt and guilt because this is the time when you're sitting at home constantly thinking of what you would be doing. There's a lot of self doubt, there's a lot of guilt for what your parents are um, going through because of your different gender sexual expression or identity. So that again leads to a lot of low self esteem, low confidence, and also depression. This pandemic situation also brought in a lot of thoughts about what accessing medical services would mean. What would it be to be infected by the COVID-19 virus and then having to seek admission in a medical institution? Would the stigma work? Would there be discrimination in the health services? Would a separate isolation be possible? What about the surge in prices? Would it be affordable? What about the other than COVID services that somebody needs to access for certain surgeries, which are now completely non-existent? It seems like the whole medical service is now completely focused on fighting the corona battle, and therefore people are not being able to undergo their hormone replacement or their transition surgeries or even any other medical surgical procedures other than transition related. So then this would again mean the whole gender sexual affirmative process is stalled, which would mean a further disruption in future plans that involved career choices and relocation to a more supportive environment. So people who had planned their transition with keeping in mind their plans of career, education, relocation, now are completely finding their plans going haywire. They now do not know what they would be able to plan next and when, and what would that then bring up? What new challenges would that bring up? Also, staying at home without jobs, without economic sustenance, meant that you would be totally dependent on your family members. So, whether you are at home and dependent on your family members and under their surveillance, even if you're in another city away from your family members, you are still perhaps now financially dependent on them because you're not earning anything. And even that long distance surveillance is working on you because now your families have all the more reason to dictate your life, to dictate the choices that you make in your life, even to dictate your regular daily movements. So surveillance can happen both when you're in the same physical space or even in another city. All these have caused a lot of mental health issues, a lot of social withdrawal or motivation, lowering of self-worth, and this complete condition of no escape that brings us to no help in hand. So there is absolutely no support service during the pandemic, uh, no transport available, no mobility, of completely restricted mobility. So if you want to access a support system, if you are facing any violence, there is nothing that you can access. You cannot go to a shelter because A, the shelters might not want to take you in. B, rents are not being available now, even if you can afford it. The other thing is that the administration is completely indifferent or complete or very abusive. So outside the home, you're facing hate crimes. There's a lot of intolerance, stigmatization, and state repression when you are outside home or you're trying to live your life on your own terms. Uh, the other thing that happened during this pandemic was that no professional help was available because perhaps the phones you could not access phones, so you could not access internet over the phone. So professional help in terms of mental health services, counseling were minimum. Um, so this has been the general the situation that the COVID-19, the pandemic has thrown us into. Now coming to looking forward, having kind of looked back and looked at the present situation, if we were to look forward, what would be our strategies of resistance? Um, how would we then be taking a stand? How would we be standing up for ourselves? One way would be seeking help. One way would be helping yourself in different ways. But also in this pandemic situation, um, a major crisis that needed to be addressed was relief and intervention in terms of just providing the basic means of um, livability, ensuring the basic conditions of livability. So one major work that had to happen at this moment was um, reaching rations to different people from the community. And there, a lot of organizations, groups, civil society groups, even youth and student initiatives have been very actively engaged in this work. And though it has not been possible to reach out to all the people who are in distress, and perhaps the number that could be reached has been almost a bare minimum. But again, here the state has been rather apathetic. There has been very, very little, very little arrangement for reaching out of relief or rations to people in need, especially from the queer community. Um, and that too, it has been a one-time effort, and with not enough for everybody. Um, But this is more in terms of the immediate. What can we do immediately? But also talking of some of the long-term measures that need to be taken in order to uh, ensure a life of dignity and justice, social justice for the queer community. We do need legal reforms and we do need to work in that respect. Um, one major change that needs to be done is, of course, bringing about changes in the trans-negative laws or the homo-negative laws that are presently in practice, um, and also changes in the criminal laws to be able to protect the queer community from physical sexual violence and hate crimes. Um, that is one of the major, I think, pillars of ensuring legal rights. The other note I would say also about state sensitization of the different state institutions, and not just sensitization, um, also putting in place some measures that would take to task certain state institutions, especially the police, that have been that have been
हाँ
engaged repressing and harassing the community. So some of these measures also need to be looked into. Another major area of work would be infrastructural changes, changes that would bring in policies in the realm of in the sectors of education, health, employment. So drawing up policies that would take into consideration the needs specific to the community in terms of access, accessing health, accessing education, accessing employment. Also, doing away with stigmatization, harassment, and abuse. Just access is not enough. Somebody might be able to access uh, these um, these institutions, but what happens once you access it? The kind of bullying, the kind of harassment, the kind of stigmatization that happens in these sectors are then ultimately they lead to a lot of discrimination and a lot of transphobic and homophobic attitudes that then lead to school dropout or maybe finally not accessing health services or even not even trying for such employment. So when we're talking of access, we also need to talk of access in a more affirmative sense. Um, so here at this juncture, I would also like to talk about status equality, the organization, collective that I'm associated with, and the kind of work that we are engaged in. Um, so what we do here is along with advocacy for legal reforms and along with um, political campaigns, we also in, are engaged in social transformation. Um, and this happens in different ways. So our usual approach has been in a number of fields. For instance, uh, at this point of time, we have been engaged in crisis intervention and relief work, though this is not one of the mandates, but we have been we thought it was important for us to um, bring relief to a lot of people who've been rendered homeless, jobless, and almost in a state of hopelessness for some kind of future life. Um, so we've also we do provide counseling services and other forms of intervention. But the other area of work has been advocacy, advocacy with police, lawyers, health, and other professionals, even corporate sector advocacy, where we try to engage in building more expansive understandings of gender and sexuality. We also have public programs for mass interaction, like film shows and publications. We also do intervene in the section in the area of knowledge production. So we have we undertake certain research initiatives. Um, we conduct gender sexual academies, conferences, school interventions, and we think that the kind of knowledge that is constantly being produced need to be intervened into. Uh, and unless we do that, it would not be able to ensure any forms of social political transformation. And we also are engaged in networking with grassroots and other social movements. And here we kind of try to weave solidarity. Uh, so yeah, and I think I'll stop here, but I'll also want to conclude in a few minutes and just try and make 2 points. Uh, so, so first point that I want to make here is what I've been trying to talk about is that we need to continue with legal reforms for rights and to ensure certain forms of justice. But we also need to understand the right discourse or the right framework has its own limitations, and we need to keep that in focus. Uh, if you look at the transgender person's protection of rights, we see that it has literally taken away much more than it has delivered. It has further curbed the freedom of expression and identities by bringing gender down to a binary of male female, and that too through medical and legal determination. So having taken away self-determination of gender, what we now have is a a legal and a medical surgical determination of gender, which will be done by people or by forces completely outside our control. It has also served to narrow down the definition of family to birth only. It has erased possibilities of acknowledging and penalizing violence and discrimination by state institutions and other social forces. Now, the queer community and its allies are still in the process of putting together a response challenging the draft rules for the Act, which is supposed to be implemented in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, uh, not taking into consideration the kind of situation that the queer community is, and whether it is even possible to come together in such a mental and physical and social state to even talk about what these draft rules actually signify and how to put together a response to that. But this has been a ploy by the state in many sections, in many fields, as we can see throughout these last 3-4 months. Um, Coming to section 377 and its reading down, the only movement post the reading down from the queer community has been in the direction of marriage equality. On the part of the state, it has been completely silent on the recommendations of the Supreme Court, on the recommendations of the Supreme Court's verdict, on the state's responsibility to erase prejudice and ensure equal rights and equal citizenship. So the verdict had certain recommendations for the state to ensure equal rights, to ensure a life of dignity and without prejudice and equal citizenship. But the state has completely been silent and not done anything in that direction. And it has not done, so it was supposed to ensure sensitization of its different institutions, including the police, and ensure that there is no discrimination in education and employment based on sexual gender orientation. Uh, that has not happened. But what is also a little disconcerting is that the community has also not, the queer community has not also perhaps worked enough to build these demands into a mass campaign, um, or to use the moment of decriminalization to demand changes in the existing laws on property, adoption, inheritance, sexual assault, trafficking, etc., to be able to make them queer affirmative. So now the question is how to build a movement post 377 and also in the wake of the Transgender People's Protection of Rights Act, how to build a movement that is not just limited to asking for marriage rights. Along with marriage rights, we perhaps also need to push for civil, economic rights, rights to self-determine gender, rights to protect against discrimination, right to protection against discrimination. We need to realize that the push from the side of the state is to heteronormalize. So just as in the Transgender People's Act, so too, if the Equal Marriage Rights Project comes through, the emphasis from the state side will be once again on establishing the heteronormative family as the cornerstone of citizenship. Because we know that the right to marry will inevitably be tied to other civil political rights that will then contribute or attribute to being a bona fide citizen. So certain rights that are tied to the right to marriage and all these rights together determine your um, your qualify you to be a bona fide citizen. So we need to be careful about that. We need to perhaps look beyond these, beyond, we, along with looking at marriage as what is that marriage right, also What does it entail as well? Are we again falling into that trap of a family that is very constricted in its meaning? And if so, then do we need to also work for the other rights along with that? Now, coming to my second point, um, along with legal reforms, one also has to work outside and beyond the legal framework. We need to work towards transformative changes that will happen from the ground, from below, from around us, and also perhaps from us. So, how can we create conditions of livability that are queer affirmative? How do we bring to the fore lives that have the possibility of challenging rigid oppressive structures that produce parochial understandings of life and love and thereby marginalize and stigmatize differences? So these are some of the questions that we need to keep in mind when we are looking forward, when we are looking to build our lives and our political campaigns, legal campaigns post the pandemic situation. I'll stop here and maybe then we can go for discussion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Biswas. Thanks a lot for your extremely informative and stimulating talk. You have touched upon a lot of important issues that I think will, provide a lot food for thought and discussion. Um, I mean, I just have a few observations from what you've said. I think what you've said is already really clear and self-evident. It's very clear. Um, I, uh, there was this one point I think where you were just talking about the NBC and the CAA, and I just actually, yeah, I hope you can hear me. Yeah. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on how the NRC and the CAA have impacted queer lives. Because I think you did discuss the transgender bill and the watering down of 377, but if you could shed some light also on NRC and CAA.
Yeah. So what I was also talking about it in the course of the this thing. Um, so if the NRC, the CAA, what would be a legitimate citizenship? How would legitimate citizenship be measured in terms of certain documents? Now, have who are the people who have these documents? So, what would happen? So, a lot of queer people have had to leave their homes at a very early stage. Some of them do not have those valid um, documents that would, prove their address or that would prove their identity. Some of them have transitioned socially, legally, or even surgically. They do not have any. They might not be having the papers. Um, they might not. They might be staying away from their families, in total disconnection with their families. We have a lot of our friends who have been away from their families and who have applied for their change in their legal documents, but the documents and they do not have a permanent residence. So the address has been their native family, and the documents have been delivered there. And this friend has not been able to go and fetch those documents from that house because of the family, because he does not want to visit that house or visit that family. He's been barred from visiting that family also. So, given such circumstances, what would the CA and RCNPR signify for such lives? Would these lives be actually rendered unviable and perhaps risk incarceration in the long run?
Thank you. Um, You did, I think, end on this very interesting irony. I mean, actually, I think I kind of just two ironies. One was, of course, the idea of how the way you complicated the public-private binary, right? I mean, about how the public-private binary does not map onto the binary between the house and what's outside the home, and the fact that the private, or what we think of as a private, in the domestic and the household, actually becomes the more harmful and pernicious space for queer people, especially during crises like these, right? And so I found that very interesting and important that you said that the pandemic and the lockdown has actually impeded access to not just sources of livelihood and health and counseling, but also in terms of access to support networks, other people in the community, other kinds of counseling and sensitization and all these things. And the other irony also is very interesting, which is the fact that when you talk about the shift between these two acts, from the 2014 and all the way down to the later transgender bill, that you have this complete stripping off the kinds of rights that had been given to transgender people in terms of gender determination, and now the fact that now that's been taken away, and now there is this again this renewed emphasis on the sexual binary and the normative family. And I'm also glad that you said, I think there was this other point in my head, which I think you already, you said, which is that the fact that, even in the whole debate around gender equality and marriage, marriage rights, equal marriage rights, that there's always this risk of this renewed emphasis on the heteronormative family and marriage as institutions. So I'm really glad that you brought out those paradoxes and those very vexed issues that we're still dealing with. What would you say are some of the other measures that can be taken in terms of trying to actually reform the transgender law? Because I think you did already mention quite a few of these issues and problems with the existing law. But what else do you think we can do in terms of actually, for example, giving greater visibility to people across a whole spectrum, of trans men especially, who seem to be a lot more invisible in many ways. Also in terms of intersex people, I'm not sure of this. There was a debate or discussion around intersex people, even people who may not be necessarily operative or post-operative, but post-surgery, but still identify as trans. So all these kind of subtleties and complications, these categories, which may or may not overlap, in sometimes are not being acknowledged or cannot be seen by the law. So.
Yeah, I think one major change that needs to be done, and there are no two ways about it, is self-determination of gender. Unless you are able to self-determine your gender, the whole spectrum of gender expressions and identities will not be validated, will be completely erased. And um, the way this law is now talking about, either you are a transgender or post-surgery, you're this side or that side of the sex, and then you are entitled to certain. So all this will cannot cannot in any way ensure your rights, your freedom of expression, your freedom to live a life of dignity. So that is, I think, one of the major pieces that we need to do. The other thing is that intersex people might not want to come under the transgender law. So we need to think of what we need to also think of what then, because there has been debate about them not wanting to come under. The other thing is that I mean the whole law needs to be actually thrown out, if you ask me. There are so many things that need to be changed that actually it should not exist. If we take into consideration all the changes. So nothing on violence, facing violence from the family, from the state, no recognition of different families, no affirmative actions in education, employment. Yeah.
You must have also, I mean, you must have heard that controversy with J.K. Rowling and what she said, and how people were up in arms about what she said about, she raised questions about self-determination, whether self-determination of gender is, should be the ultimate basis for, gender affirmation of any kind of gender expression. Um, so, I mean, I was just actually, because I think sometimes people say that, should that be the ultimate basis or not? Does that risk, questioning people who are, cis women in certain situations? Are people being produced as cis women only, and not, or should transgender people identify as trans and not as male or female? So those kinds of controversies have come up in the past, the recent past.
Yeah, I don't have any. Because for me, self-determination is important. Um, yeah, and because I want to I want to recognize and acknowledge the whole spectrum of gender expressions or sexual expressions. So yeah.
Okay. Now, yeah, so there are some questions from the participants. I'll just read out one question. The question is, recently there's been a lot of discussion on queer capital and queer economy, which propagates a utopic image of empowerment amongst us. But the foundation of queer economy is highly capitalist and divisive, catering to the needs of a selective few, and majority of the others suffer under the undercurrent of different. Uh, so I think the question is a little long. It's a little long, but I think I think Ritam Banerjee is trying to say that there are few who benefit from the queer economy and the capitalist economy, and most of the majority suffer, and especially those who are multiply oppressed along various intersections. So, how do you address this discourse of queer capitalism and queer economy?
Yeah. So there is this. So what we understand by queer capitalism is how does a certain section of the queer community, how do they then gain access to um, the kind of economic, so the kind of pinkwashing that is happening. So the kind of you are constantly able to access certain benefits, but then and you use that as a peg to justify your um, your identity as a valid citizen. So if not everybody is able to access. So what happens to these um, to people who are not able to access such economic measures, and who have not be who do not who cannot participate in market, who cannot in that market driven economy, and who cannot then um, find those legitimate markers of citizenship. So yeah, so I think we need to be critical about queer capitalism.
Um, if the participants have any other questions, please unmute yourself and ask, or you may type your questions in the chat box. Any questions? Okay, so maybe we can just wait unless other people have questions. But let me just ask you one more question, which is that since you have had, a lot of experience in the field of mental health and mental counseling. I mean, what measures can be taken there? Because that's, mental health itself is seen as a stigma, whether you are queer or whatever you are. So I do feel like that's an area where a lot more intervention has to be made, and I'm sure that area is also interlinked with many other aspects of queer lives. So I mean, how do you? Because we see a lot of counselors who claim to be sensitive, but then end up actually in their own way destroying lives. I mean, they end up saying things that should never have been said. They have no idea about, they have not been educated or sensitized themselves in terms of these issues. And we see, if you want to go and get an HIV test done, for example, you have to undergo some kind of counseling, and that kind of counseling very often is not, it's not really helpful, because it means nothing. What does it mean to get counseled simply because you want to get an HIV test done? If it was hepatitis or something else which could also be sexually transmitted, it doesn't seem to acquire the same degree of stigma, the same so the kind of questions that people ask, are you married? Why do you want to get it done? Again, a lot of questions that suggest the same repetition of norms and institutions and family and marriage. So, I mean, what can be done? Because right now, as you were saying earlier, that a lot of queer people now, right now, end up spending a lot of time with people with families who are homophobic, and they have no respite from this. They can't go anywhere else. They don't have access to internet or the phone. There's no privacy. So it becomes a lot more pressing now for them to actually be able to access mental health professionals. So what would be your kind of take on that? What can be done in terms of a larger awareness campaign, larger structural change in the way people think about mental health issues?
So there are two things to this. Uh, One is one that is the services that are being provided and the people who are providing the services. If I come to that first, then um, there's a lot of so the mindset actually also dictates the kind of service you're providing. So there's the trans and homonegative attitude that is not just present in the person, that is also present in the textbooks that the professional is being trained in. So starting from the textbooks, the syllabus, uh, to the methods of teaching, to the mindsets that permeate that teaching, both on the side of receiving and on the side of giving. All that also needs to be looked into, because there's a lot of heterosexism and binary genderism ingrained into what we are being taught. And that is not just the fault of the people who are who are training. It's also what is being, it's actually ingrained in the scientific discourse itself. So if we have to start rethinking gender sexuality, we have to do it from the kind of knowledge that is being produced about gender sexuality, and start from that and come on to the also to the person who's receiving that training, and how can then the person become more objective and more sensitive. um, that is a long process, and it's just begun. Like we now have a lot of people who are queer identified and into the mental health profession, So that is also making a change, because being out in that profession actually impacts the people who are around you, your colleagues, so your friends, your classmates, and what is not happening in the classroom is probably happening outside the classroom. So what is not happening in the syllabus is happening in the student community. So that is one change. The other change is also happening in where we are being able to push symposiums, conferences, and trying to push in the agenda through different ways. Coming to the side of the service, that is people who are seeking the service. I think in the queer community, it's just an offhand comment, but I think in the queer community, the level of stigma is much less regarding accessing mental health services. Um, so I think a lot of it is to do with the kind of precarity that a person is constantly faced with in their daily lives when it comes to their families or their workplaces or their education institutions. So I think that itself um, creates that condition where you want to stand up for yourself and thereby seek help, because sometimes to stand up for yourself, it is necessary to seek help from others, and others who are sensitive and who understand you. So I think that is there. Uh, yeah. Now coming to the HIV counseling post-test and pre-test counseling, I think at one point of time it was when it was initial stages when it was thought of and it had been brought in. Um, Irrespective of what comes in the form, I think what the idea was to prepare a person, because given of the stigma that is attached at that point of time, that was attached to HIV and AIDS, and the kind of the stigma was not just related to the disease; it came on to the kind of life you're living, the kind of sexual associations you're having. So the whole it was, I think, the intention was to address that stigma and therefore make the person comfortable with the idea of being tested. And I'm not going into the politics of surveillance through the process of testing. So I'm keeping that aside, right? But I'm just trying to talk about the process. Perhaps it could have, I'm talking completely from a mental health perspective. It would have it to prepare the person in order to fight the stigma that might come with the result. The and also to prepare the person for a life that is uh, positive, that happens post a result coming out positive. So, what would be the changes in that life? What would it entail? How would you then be living that life? What would be your sexual practices? So I think from a mental health perspective, but now the forms, the questions that are asked, and I think the stigma is now reintroduced in a different form, um, in a different way. But yeah,
Yes, I think you're quite right in what you said. The fact that the first point you made, that a lot of the sexual education programs which are introduced in schools very often just end up being about how does one have practice safe sex, but it's not about a larger awareness about gender presentation, about intimacy issues, and the fact that a lot of these classes take place by segregating people along genders. And sometimes that might be useful, but sometimes it may actually be quite counterproductive. In your social work, your activism, in your organization, have you also interacted with the police and with other law enforcement agencies when it comes to questions of discrimination and harassment? And what has your experience been working with them? Have they been amenable to your sensitization programs, your suggestions? Is very often, is it a question of language? Sometimes how do you use language, especially non-English languages, to talk about intimacy, about rights, about the politics of sexuality. So I was just wondering, what has your experience been?
yes, we have interacted. We've done a series of programs with the police in West Bengal, and it has been a very enriching experience actually, because the interactions have been sometimes very encouraging, very smooth, sometimes very turbulent, very confrontational. Um, Sometimes, but also talking about the more positive consequences. Um, at one point of time, we were actually um, um, told by the different departments, the different departments in the police, so the different areas and the departments to actually, we were invited to come and do these workshops when because they felt that this was necessary. Um, so that was one was that positive consequence. Another positive consequence was that there have been a couple of incidents where when parents or family members have brought in their daughters in one case who were in a same gender relationship. So they hauled them to the police thana, local thana, and told them that, look, they are doing this and you need to. So then the thana people actually told the parents that you cannot do this. They are not doing anything illegal, and they have the right to be together. And you need to actually respect the right to be together. And they have also passed on the number of Saku for Equality, the helpline number to these two women, and told them to get in touch with us so that they can, find ways to live their lives independently. So that has also happened on a couple of occasions. Um, but also coming to the language part, um, yes, there has been a lot of debates about so we've had discussions about what language to use. What kind of language, in the sense that how do we uh, use these terminologies working with the police? So we've tried to use the kind of terminologies that they are comfortable with. So we've gone with terms which are used on the ground, terms that have that they are very used to hearing on the streets or in various other gatherings. So we've used those terms to be able to to break the ice, because this was this group of women coming and talking about gender sexuality to a whole group of to a room full of police um, who were actually also segregated according to hierarchy. So we would have police officers, the higher ranks sitting in the front, and then the lower ranks sitting behind them in that order. And then they would the lower ranks would not be speaking, only the higher ranks would be speaking, and they would be actually very rattled by the fact that who are these women who look so different, who look so non-normative, who all of them with short hair. We actually heard a comment from one of these workshops who told us that, all of you, why do you have short hair, all of you? Why, what is this? So this has been some of these experiences where we've had to actually break that rigidity, that kind of that barrier, and talk in their terms, and talk about gender sexuality, the whole gamut of gender sexuality, and therefore, and also deal with the hierarchy. So also deal with the fact that there are a lot of people in the room who are not talking, who want to talk but who are not being able to speak in front of their seniors, bosses. So that has been a very interesting and enriching experience. And we've still been approached. We've also been approached again by the police force to restart these workshops. So maybe, yeah, we'll be planning. We're still in the planning phase now.
Thank you. There's another question by Ritom, who asks, there's a lot of discussion and talk about discrimination, and there are problems that are emerging from within the community in which homonormativity is creating a norm which fosters the othering process relentlessly. Don't you think we should sensitize ourselves first?
Absolutely agree with him. I agree with Preetham. Um, um, so I mean, yes, because I think that is a problem of being appropriated by any kind of structure that becomes the mainstream. So while we are challenging the mainstream, the heteronormativity, and it is not important. I mean, it is important not to get comfortable with your own queerness, with your own, you know, um, uh, So when you're occupying a position of marginality vis-a-vis the mainstream, and then you tend to again create build structures within that marginality, and then that becomes dominant, and then you further marginalize other people. So it is very important to be aware of that, absolutely. And this is where I think what we need to keep alive is the process of queering. So for us, queering is the process of constantly questioning norms. So not building or finding boxes outside the big boxes, but constantly breaking boxes, constantly breaking and jumping out of boxes, questioning boxes, and constantly being in the process of becoming. So queering is also something that talks of self-reflexivity. So what am I doing? Am I in being, in trying to be different? Am I then building a norm of difference? Am I curbing or curtailing all kinds of differences and only instituting a certain way to be a certain authentic way to be different? So that we need to be careful about.
Thank you. There's another question by Kaustav. It's my observation that in Assam and many other northeastern states, even highly educated people in academics are not comfortable talking and discussing alternative sexualities, rights of transgender, or other crucial issues of other genders. How does one address that?
Um, I can talk about our experience from SAPO and how we actually went into academic spaces. In so I won't talk about them in 1, 2, 3 because then it'll. So we did certain workshops and interactions with students in the higher education institutions. Uh, we actually found friends and allies in certain institutions to begin with. So before, at the initial stages, we would find these allies, and they would help us, in getting in organizing a workshop. Often we would not use the word sexuality because some of our friends in higher education institutions have told us that you come and do and say whatever you want to, but don't keep the word sexuality in the title of the workshop because that will again ring a few unnecessary bells. So what we did was we often pegged our discussion on, patriarchy, gender violence, sexual violence even, but not sexuality. And then we slowly, when we saw that students were completely in sync with us, and we slowly ventured into these terrains. And sometimes we also did some queer conferences. We still do conferences. We organize conferences which are organized by Sappho for Equality, but within academic spaces. So with in Jadavpur University. So when we do that, that itself creates a platform for students and faculty members to maybe just keep in, take a seat, listen to a few things, a paper or two, and just go out and think. So, you know, that kind of creates an inroad because just the banner there in the academic space is one important way of interacting. I've also heard of queer groups being formed by students in higher education institutions, and that is also one very important way of engaging with gender sexuality and trying to include it within the academic space, within the campus in different ways, not just um, uh, uh, yeah. So the other way would be also I've heard of queer courses which studies gender, new genders, and sexuality studies. So just introducing one paper in a course, if that is possible, or teaching one module. If you are a person who want to um, bring in this kind of difference, you can just teach one module, or you can just bring in multiple interpretations of a text And one of these interpretations would be queer friendly, which is actually erased, mostly erased, right? Mostly not brought into a classroom. So maybe you are the one who can do that in the comfort of in that friendly environment of a classroom. Also, research initiatives. A lot of students have actually come to Sappho Equality because they wanted to do research in their subjects which were on gender sexuality. So supporting those research often then, created that space within educational institutions where people would be more comfortable to talk and discuss about gender sexuality. Yeah, I can't, I mean, these are some of the suggestions. I can't think of any. Maybe others can also help those who are listening, or you can also um, say, yeah,
Yes,
Christian.
I think you already gave some very good suggestions, and many of these suggestions need to be implemented on a more regular and on a broader level. Yes, if so, there's another question by Sanjay. Sorry, Shonjeep. Uh, he asks, we are still struggling to talk openly about sexual health. How do you think we should bring about more discussions about mental health, where mental health issues have stigma attached?
Mhm. So I don't know. True, mental health has a lot of stigma attached to it, but I think one way would be talking about positive mental health, not not trying to talk about only mental health diseases, disorders, or distress, but talking about positive mental health. So one entry point can be that when you talk about positive mental health, slowly you go into the concerns that would actually jeopardize your positive mental health. So then that could be one way. Um, Also talking about not mental health disorders. So I think when we talk about disorders, we think about those chronic mental health conditions which carry a lot of stigma because of their chronicity, because of their not good prognosis, because of their lifetime, incarceration or whatever. So talking about some of these um, very daily conditions like anxiety, neurosis, or so these could be some of these situations which are very relatable for people because I've often heard this. I'm sure others have also heard this in their clinic because supposing someone comes in with certain conditions of anxiety and sees a person sitting outside who's probably having a more difficult time, probably talking to self or in a condition of disheveled, and the person comes in and tells me, I'm not mad. So that kind of stigma is attached to more chronic disorders, so more chronic conditions. So maybe that is also a way to talk about conditions that are more relatable, where a person comes in with palpitation, anxiety, headache, somatic pain, and then make that an entry point to talk about mental health and why mental health is important, and how is mental health then also related to gender sexuality or other forms of or other intersections of identity. So I don't know, Shonjit, if that is what you're trying to ask me, but I think uh, this is something. Um, Sexual health is again, yes, violence is one very important way, easy way to enter into sexual health because violence is rampant. Violence has so many forms, and violence, if we talk about violence, then we can talk about health. So I think that is also one way of talking.
I think Milind has questions for the speaker.
Yes, I do. Hi, Ranjita. Good to have you with us today.
I can't
Uh,
hear a million.
Just
can you hear me?
You'll have
No,
to speak loudly.
You cannot hear me properly. Hello.
yeah, tell me.
Yeah, okay. So my question is, so Calcutta is much ahead of us, Northeast, and quite a lot of people, for specifically for transgender, for most of the stuff, they just go to, go out of Northeast. Could you advise or guide us, a little thing? Before that, I wanted to ask another question about suffer for equality. Wanted to know a little bit history, so that how could we go there, like, how could we go there, to that stage, so that people from Northeast don't have to go out of Northeast while they are doing transitioning, or, like, I know many people who had, problem with the family, and I know that you guys had helped them, the parents had gone talked to you. um, so how Northeast can come to that level, need some guidance.
Milind, I'm really not a person to guide you. I can only talk about our experiences because you are so much your context, like you said, is different, and you're the best judge of your context, your situation, and I think all of you are doing wonderful work there, and you are also doing a lot of work in community building and building resources, in building campaigns, and I really appreciate and respect what you do. I know that there's a lot of struggle, and I understand and I agree with you that the situation, the political situation is so different in Northeast compared to what we are in Calcutta or in West Bengal. I can just share a few things about our journey in Sapphic Equality, and I'll also
Hmm.
request our other members from Sapphic Equality who are there to also pitch in if I miss out on something, or otherwise even. Um, so we did start as just a group of, six people who came together, who were surprised to find each other in the city, um, and who were actually trying to just be each other's support. And the initial stages, what they did was just, reach out to other people in the community, and that too through newspaper articles, through a small helpline number which was inserted in one of these newspaper corner, small space. Um, Running a helpline just once a week for I think a couple of hours, a landline with a certain women's group or a women's organization, where a lot of calls came in. Having a post box number in a local newspaper where a number of letters came in asking for help, wanting to meet, and then meeting up these people in different places. Uh, Slowly, the community was built, and then they decided to form SAFO as a support group, as a group that would support each other emotionally and otherwise. When this group was increasing in numbers, and also when different stories of struggle was coming from these different lives about the struggles they face with their families in the outside, at workplaces in education institutions. So the question then arose was it enough to support each other? Was it important to also build bridges with the outside community, with the community, with the non-queer community, with these families, with these people who, with the state, do we need to work with the state? Do we need to build solidarities with other women's groups? So the first choice was the women's groups for us in Sapphic Equality, with the Moitri that was a platform here of women's groups and individuals working with for women's rights. Um, so that was one part of the journey where we kind of moved out of our circle, albeit with a lot of trepidation, with a lot of fear, with a lot of caution, because then 377 was very much in force. The state and we started finding allies. So there were different allies that we were lucky to have. who then so then we started, going public with our newsletter, which spoke about our lives, which spoke about our politics, which spoke about our aspirations and our dreams. Um, and that helped us to move into to reach out to so many people within the community and outside the community. Then we gradually expanded into um, hosting public programs. All this was absolutely, it was not a very smooth journey. So there was a lot of us who were working in public sectors, in government offices, who had to constantly negotiate this, this um, thin line between visibility and invisibility, the advantages and disadvantages of both visibility and invisibility. We started building up a political campaign. We started building up networks, solidarities with other social movements, with other like-minded people. We started these inroads into academic institutions through our lives there. So these have been many instances of the work, the kind of work we did. Yes, we worked with parents. We made films for us, and also I forgot to mention this during. I think it was Ritam's question on. I think Ritam or Kaustav who asked this question about how to go into um, educational institutions. So I think film was also one very big medium for us to use. So we did these film screenings in workshops, in classrooms, public forums, where these films then became a medium for initiating interaction with people. Not just interaction, also people from the community who came and watched these films and were happy to know that there are other lives like theirs, happy to share struggles with the protagonists on the screen. We cried, we laughed together when we watched these films, and we strengthened, we grew more strong in our resolve to fight it out. So I think each of us have our own journeys, and there are certain, there will be certain overlaps, certain ways in which we can share our experiences and maybe encourage each other to undertake our journeys together or otherwise.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Thank you, thank you. Anybody else in the audience, or maybe other SAFO members who would like to add or ask questions, please do so. Any other questions or comments
I have one
from?
more question, Ranjita. You know, what about medical colleges? We wanted to, the Assam Medical College and Guwahati Medical College. Last time when we went and talked in the Assam Medical College, we have to, have to wait for 3 days to convince the principal to allow us to talk. That also informally. He did not even formally. And finally, for Guwahati Medical College, also similar. Initially they rejected, and then thankfully, Dr. Maithili Hazarika and others, worked together. And finally, after 3 or 4 days, the principal agreed because we got the HODs to agree on it. So, and then we had the first square talk in Assam Medical College. But still, there is no studies, on queer health in the medical college, nor nursing home, nor the what do you call dental college. So I mean, we were trying to do a queer health summit. Then COVID happened. Didn't have, we were working with Maithili and all. So and I was telling them that we should have that. We should encourage young doctors why they should study about endocrinologies, or why they have to study queer health, because everything connected. Finally, everything is connected. If I'm queer and I'm not able to express myself, it will affect other parts. Say I'm not eating properly, say I'm depressed, it will affect other part of my health too, right? So
Yeah.
all are connected. So but it hasn't happened yet. We have to finally, some way that we have to encourage people, because there's no surgery right now over here for transgender also. They have to go outside. And how could we, that becomes so much of stress if it is Guwahati. The whole surgery is so long, and top of that you have to go somewhere else, stay over there, more expenses. I don't know. I mean, what is, how educated are the doctors in colleges in Calcutta, and do they have a queer studies, or just I don't have knowledge about it. Do you have some information?
So, I think you're right when you say that it is the young doctors are the ones who, the students, the PGTs, the young doctors are the ones who need to be tapped, because I think they're also more open. They're ready to learn, if not for anything, at least for the commercial interest. So I think now, because they realize that it is important to be queer friendly, also because it helps their the, their their profession in monetary ways also. So I think they are the people who are ready to come and listen to a workshop or a talk. But I can understand when you say that it's so difficult to enter even into the college and broach the subject of a talk. We've also had such experiences here, while trying to engage with medical college here and organizing a workshop there. A lot of the people from the plastic surgery department said, yes, yes, we are doing surgeries here in gender reassignment, and we are definitely going to come to the workshop. And then on the day of the workshop, we were desperately, frantically ringing up all those doctors, and asking them, why aren't you coming? The workshop has started. And they said that, oh, we have an emergency surgery now and we are busy. So they did not turn up. I think that was deliberate. We all think that was deliberate. But I what just by way of suggestion, one way would be to find allies in the psychiatry department, in the psychiatry stream, because I think psychiatry is one of those disciplines that is compelled to take into consideration issues around gender and sexuality. They are compelled to now, because they are going to be taken to task much more if they are trans or homophobic, yeah. So I think because psychiatry is the only discipline where at least homosexuality finds mention in the textbooks, or gender identity disorder, gender dysphoria in these terms find mention. So one way would be to start interacting with psychiatrists, with the students of psychiatry and psychiatrists, and tell them that, uh, show them the kind of the WHO and the ICD and the DSM notifications that about gender dysphoria and about homosexuality, because a lot of our psychiatrists are also not aware of the changes, the recent changes. They cannot differentiate between homosexuality and gender dysphoria. So every person who is slightly effeminate, they decide that they're suffering from gender dysphoria. So actually cannot make a difference between gayness and gender transgender. So I think going through psychiatry and then um, trying to build this multidisciplinary team from uh, gynecology, from plastic surgery, from endocrinology, even ENT, that could be one of the measures.
What's
I
the
can also.
problem? Sorry.
Mhm.
one of the problem we face is that the people who are psychologists or therapists who are so-called LGBT friendly, but in the tea they get stuck. You know, they will
Mm.
still go on gendering and misnaming, and they think that it is okay. If you are getting upset, then you need therapy. That's what I was told. It was like, if it is in the other countries, you lose your license if you go on
Absolutely.
call misgender, because somebody is paid so much of money to come to you, and they feel more sad coming to you because you are instead of giving them assertion or making them feel good, you are making them feel worse. And they still do not realize that that is wrong you know and I mean, they genuinely care about LGBTQ, but then the basic thing somehow they don't understand. Most of
Mm.
it's
Mm.
just like that how important it is for trans people, for at least the counselor or therapies to address the trans community with the correct gender and the name you
Absolutely.
know and
Yes.
so it's
Yeah.
very disappointing, because these are the LGBT friendly therapies, quite a few of them. And then
Yeah.
still make some little silly jokes, you know, and I'm like, that's not appropriate, right? So
Yeah.
it becomes a little bit frustrating experience because finally you get some friendly LGBTQ friendly therapists. You get a door, but then still they go on making mistake, and then you go on telling them, but then how long can you go on correcting them? I don't even feel then know that whether they really care.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with you, Milind, that a lot of us in the mental health profession are not trained or are not sensitive, and we do not respect the rights of the queer community, especially transgender people. Um, and there needs to be a lot of work done. Um, and I think I think it is also important for the statutory bodies like the Indian Psychiatric Association or the psychological associations societies to actually take on these. So there are these queer task forces in some of these, but they are also not always effective. I can what I can just suggest by the way that I don't know if that will be helpful, but we've developed a gender affirmative therapy guideline.
mhm.
It is present on the website of SAPO for Equality, and that
Okay.
guideline was put together in consultation with all the different multidisciplinary professionals from the medical field, from the legal field, and also in consultation with the community. And these guidelines have they kind of have certain things that might be helpful to professionals. So if you can share this guideline with the professionals
Sure.
who might not actually, I mean, they might not be, sorry, the sheer lack of knowledge might make them behave in certain ways, and they might be amenable to receiving information and knowledge on this front. So
Okay.
just using the guideline to giving them that guideline and just asking them to go through that and use them in their practice would also, I don't know if that might be helpful. I'm just thinking.
That will be great to have that. At least something is
Yeah.
better than.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Ranjit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience? You can
10258688.
you can unmute yourself and any further questions?
Yeah, I have one question to Ranjita ma'am. It's about the politics of the love, which is gaining a lot of rave and review and attention all over. Like there are different eminent scholars like Bell Hooks or say Kamla Bhasin who are emphasizing the importance of radical loving. So in most of the psychotherapeutic session, they actually keep on telling us about just love yourself the way you are, just accept yourself the way you are, which are kinda stereotypical for me, because I have met many psychotherapists and the approach they suggest are goes above the head, because they will come up with different types of jargon, say the cognitive behavioral therapy and different other type of stuff which a lay person cannot perceive, and then they will talk about loving yourself. So don't you think, ma'am, that we should actually delve deeper in this in the politics of love, and we should actually counter question them that what exactly you mean by love, because the love that you were asserting is like a norm you are trying to propagate onto me. Shouldn't the love should actually come from ourselves? Shouldn't it actually sprout within ourselves, so that the discrimination which is prevailing in each and every sector can be mitigated? And my second question to you is that in the pedagogical space, or say in the space of academia, we generally try to study how this queer movement have started, or like what are the current types of the issues which we are actually facing. But this is very, very one-sided. We have different other types of voices, and we have different types of standpoint which doesn't gain any attention. To take the example of bisexuality, because I'm researching on bisexuality, and in the space of academia I haven't come across with any academical research which is based on the lived experiences of the Indian bisexuality, or the Indian bisexual queer men and the Indian bisexual trans women. So ma'am, how you will address these two important issues?
Sorry, may I know who's addressing this question?
It's me, ma'am, Ritam.
Okay, Ritam. Ritam, when you say, when you talk about the politics of love and how therapists talk about loving yourself, um, when they say that, do they mean which self do they mean? Loving which self?
They actually, ma'am, tell that okay, you have to accept yourself the way you are, just imagine this and that, and just make peace with yourself. But and then, ma'am, they will come out with, and they will keep on saying about different types of jargons which actually goes above my head, like cognitive behavioral therapy, you have to do this, you have to do that. So it doesn't actually penetrate into my mind in that way. So that's why, like, I was questioning
Yeah,
you.
yeah. But I was just thinking, just to answer this thing in a different way, this has nothing to do about love. I think it is all to do about, curbing self-expression. So someone who says that, someone who wants to use cognitive behavior therapy to be able to make you love yourself the way you are, is actually being very homo and trans negative. So I don't think there is anything to do about. So this person is completely, I think, not being sensitive, not being queer friendly or queer affirmative. Uh, Leave alone queer affirmative, not even being queer sensitive. So, so I think the whole problem lies in pathologizing a person. In saying that love yourself the way you are. I think it's basically trying to make you fit into that binary norm of masculine, feminine, or male, female. So I really think this needs to be resisted. The other question about bisexuality, I think you're right. I agree that bisexuality is not as visible as needs it should be, or it needs to be. Absolutely no kind of there are hardly any documented examples, hardly any research work that goes on bisexuality. Very few, or I don't know if there are too many. Uh, I think there are some collectives that are coming up um, uh, over the social media that are now slowly trying to sorry, build a campaign around bisexuality, trying to express trying to articulate the need to express themselves and trying to address the issue of bisexuality in academic, political spaces. But these are very initial uh, um, some of these very initial stages. I don't uh, think, of course, we need to talk of it more, and we need to make it into a political category as well. So that is something we need to do. Yes, that's lacking.
Okay. Any maybe I can allow one more question if there's any questions left. Maybe a question. Okay. Um, all right. Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Yeah. So I was
Yes.
wanting to know from Anajari, also Team Anajari, about what, how they, go about the issues of gender sexuality and what have been their experiences in, trying to build a campaign, trying to build a political movement around these issues. If somebody would just talk about it, I think there are things that we can learn. Is it possible?
Yes, I think Milind would be the best person, best equipped to answer that question. Uh,
I have four stray dog and one stray dog and three kitten, and they are fighting. So I was muting it. Right now we are just gathering knowledge. As you know that I just came back, after 25 years from US, and I'm here 6 months, and during this COVID, we had all these people coming from different outside people who work outside Assam or Northeast are coming back, and for we started our whole thing that how could we create more entrepreneurship, because Assam or Northeast need more entrepreneurship. That's why we started our whole webinar series, this whole another webinar series. And then we realized that there's more people, there's almost 30 people in the waiting list, and we thought that just doing once a week is not enough, it will take years. So we decided that we will work on every day. So then we decided that what topic, I decided what topic actually I'm working on or focusing on, or supporting others. I'm just supporting others who are doing, but these are the topics that I'm very interested in. And then one was about LGBTQ and women empowerment. So we thought that, okay, rather than saying that, we'll say it as a, what do you call, um, we'll say it as a gender or sexuality, and trying to basically find out who are the people doing good work, who are the local heroes, trying to get from each district, as far as possible, just gathering and making sure that we are talking about it, what they're doing, what are the information. And we're just trying to collect the dots right now, like whether it is gender and sexuality, or whether it is art or culture or education or health or animal care or farming and environment, entrepreneurship, elder care. So we have seven, topics. Every day we are having webinars. We do not know how long we can do it. We're collecting the dots. We are basically right now we are doing three things. One is getting a platform to local heroes generally, then also hoping that young generation are listening and getting inspired. And we are building a network of networkers. Now somebody has said that, hey, I want to come back, I want to do fishery. I'll say, okay, we'll say, okay, go and talk to Nilam Datta from Tejpur. Somebody said that I just have little money, I want to start something. We'll say, okay, do you want to start a piggery? And talk to, by the way, Diganja Saikia from Dibrugarh, you know. So we are creating the data. We are also, there's Samir Bordoloi, who is doing local people, local food, local economy, a great initiative. So, we're just trying to connect that dots. And when somebody, as we know that so and so, Samir is already working with 400 villages. Then slowly we're talking about, can you do seed bank also? Can you also talk about gender inequality? Can you also talk about STEM education in the village? You know, so we, as soon as we are finding one entry, then we are trying to, and by the way, how could you make the village zero waste? Because we are also working on zero waste or shopping plus.
Mhm.
So just connecting the dots, we do not know what will be the future. Right now, we have like 24 volunteers. We are all volunteering, gathering this information. It's also helping younger people to, host and, get information, making flyers and just connecting. So I do not know. I'm not in a what do you call medical academia, so I do not know academic terms or whatever. Just a visionary and just trying to figure out those dots. That's what we're doing right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just one question left from the audience, which is that I think I may have. This is a question from Dr. Mukul Sharma, which is, or I may actually have to ask him to elaborate the question. But the question is, do you think bisexuality is forced behavior?
You want me to answer that?
I mean, that's the question. Unless I don't know if you.
No,
Yes.
I don't. Is he going to elaborate the question, or should I be answering it?
So, Dr. Sharma, would you like to elaborate the question? You can actually unmute yourself if you want to explain the question a bit. Okay, all right. I think he's that's fine. Yes. Okay. On behalf of, unless you want to answer the question,
I
because
just have one sentence maybe, but I don't think bisexuality is a forced behavior. I think the whole spectrum of sexual practices, desires is such that as long as there's consent, any sexual practice, any sexual behavior, any sexual orientation can be is possible and can be practiced. Uh, and So there are so many sexual orientations, not just bisexuality. There is pansexuality. There is uh, polyamory. There is so many aspects to sexual desire, and we need to be aware of that whole spectrum and um, acknowledge and respect that whole spectrum. I don't think anything is a forced behavior as long as it is something that you choose on your own free will.
okay. So on behalf of Anna Jury, I'd like to thank you a lot for your extremely insightful and thoughtful and sensitive talk. Yes, thank you very much. Sorry?
I said you mean it, right?
Absolutely. I was listening. I was all ears on every word. I was hanging on every word. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And thank you to the participants for being here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.